we have two sessions, one this week and one next week, looking at daylight, simulation and visualization. Today we are going to follow up this session where we will have a workshop. We'll look a little bit more into visualization techniques, and next week we'll continue with the daylight simulation. The reason that this takes sort of 2 or 3 sessions is because I think this is one of the most powerful suites of tools for architectural designers. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, as the architect of a project or as a designer, you have a huge input in terms of window design and daylight design. And it's an area, I think, where for the previous 5 or 10 years, the sort of balance between design and simulation has been slightly confused, with the simulation for daylight taking place under the control of the engineer rather than the architect. And as I've mentioned before, the architects become somewhat removed from that simulation process. Now, the tools that I'll show you today place the architect firmly in control of that daylight simulation and visualization. So let's go into Revit, and I've opened a file. This is the sample file that I gave you at the beginning of the year. It's the very complex building design. It's one of my students from last year. So we're going to use that for today's session. It is quite a large file. Now, when I was testing it last week, it does work perfectly well, but obviously with the video recording running, if it's just too big a file to cope, I'll switch to a slightly smaller file. But the reason I wanted to show you this file is because it's a great example of a project where the building has been modelled well, there's furniture in place, there's light fittings, and it gives you a real capability in terms of daylight simulation and visualization. The sample model that you've been given for your assignment, the building down on the forecourt, does not have furniture in it. And as you'll see when you look at the example reports from last year, some of the better work, the students took the time to download furniture. If you type Revit families, Revit furniture into Google, you'll find lots of sites offering you free downloads of 3D furniture, 3D light fittings. So the emphasis on you there is to start to populate that building, to make it look more like a kind of real inhabited building. Particularly when you're doing simulation and visualization, if your building is devoid of any furniture, it's quite difficult to understand it as a space or as a building. Whereas I'm sure even with this image that we have on screen, you can immediately understand we've got chairs, we've got tables, we've got a counter here, we've got light fittings. You might just be able to make out there are bicycles stacked up in the back there. And it's a really good example, I think, where this student invested the time in populating the building with furniture and just adding enough detail to the building to make it look convincing. So it's something I want you to bear in mind for the SAS students. When you move into your studio projects, the benefit of adding that little bit of extra time into your 3D model will have huge rewards in terms of visualization and simulation. Okay, so I hope you've all looked at this sample model that I gave you right back at the beginning of the course, and you're probably familiar that it has a whole range of views already created. I'm not going to go back into how to create views. We looked at that in one of the earlier sessions, how you place a camera in the building. So you can go and re-watch that if you're not sure. And what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at 3D visualization and simulation in terms of daylight. Next week, we'll move on to a more 2D, where we will look at some techniques for analyzing the whole building. Okay? Now the other thing with this session is I've put a video, I put one of the videos earlier on in the course. I've put another video on mole, which is from the Principles of Building Physics module. So any of you who are not taking Principles of Building Physics, I did give you another video which is about the principles of daylight. So I do encourage you to watch that video. It's on mole, because that will just help you to understand some of the physics behind what we're talking about today. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we have a view, an interior view of a room, and we want to start to test this in terms of daylight. And then we want to also start to test it in terms of the kind of visualization and what does this room feel like. So in a Revit environment, we're just in a simple shaded view here, and I mean, even as it stands, you do have a simulation here. This is quite a simple simulation. It's just showing shadow and sunlight. And what you can see is we've got these sort of patterns of light coming through, which are being manipulated by the shading and by some reflection off surfaces. And as we looked back in one of the earlier sessions, we can, of course, just change the position of our sun and get a very basic shaded visualization. Okay? So that's one stage of simulation we already have. Now what we want to move on to now is actually, let's look at the quantitative aspects of the daylight. So let's actually start to look at the measures, the actual metrics of daylight in this space. As I say, next week we'll look at a technique for analysing the building just as a more simple 2D plane. We'll start with the 3D view. And we're going to use the Autodesk Cloud Render services. And it's very similar to when we were doing the energy simulation. We were sending off our model to Autodesk, and they were doing the calculation in their computers. Now I think these are really very powerful tools, fully integrated into the design process and incredibly quick. So let's get on with it. So what we need to do, we need to go up to, under the View tab, we need to go to Render in the Cloud. Okay? You can also render in Revit itself, but I'm not teaching that because I just prefer to do it in the cloud because it's quicker and it offers more possibilities. So render in cloud, you need to be signed in. So if you notice, I'm already signed in to my Autodesk account. And we get this menu. Select the 3D views to render in the cloud. Now you can select any of your views that you have in your models. Okay, you can select more than one view at any one time, but generally I find the simplest thing is just render the view that you're looking at. But if you wanted to, bearing in mind that this is a cloud service, you could send 20 views to render straight away. But let's just do one for now. Okay. But what I could imagine you might do, let's say you've produced a whole series of renders, and then you make a change to the building, you might then just want to send them all to re-render. We just do one. Output type, still image, interactive panorama, or Illuminance. Still image will give you a visualization render of that space. It'll give you quite a good feel for what that space looks like. So let's just start with a still image. Render quality, standard or final. Generally put it on final. Image size, you might as well use the maximum. It will slow things down a little bit, but bearing in mind these are not being rendered on your computer, that processing will be done on someone else's machine, on Autodesk servers. So generally, I put this onto a high resolution. For today, I'll just knock it back a bit, and then there's a chance that we'll see them rendered during the class. I've rendered them all at the weekend anyway, so I've got them all finished to show you. But we'll leave it on just a 2.25. Exposure, advanced or native. You can play about with that, but I normally just leave it on advanced. File format, PNG, JPEG, TIFF. You choose what you like. And what you see you are doing here is you are using cloud credits, which in your education license don't cost you anything. There is a limit. Autodesk will only let you have 16 credits per request. Normally, you'll not exceed that anyway. If you're doing an interactive panorama, which I'll come to in a moment, you could exceed that. Now, for the free service, I would say just reduce it. If you want to start paying, that's up to you, but I wouldn't recommend it. Okay? So this render is going to cost us 2 credits. Fine, doesn't cost me anything. We haven't exceeded our 16 per request. Estimated wait time, less than 10 minutes. Fine. Let's start rendering. Now, this file, normally, you can just click on continue in the background. This file, I know that I've got a few material images missing. So every time you render, it will come up and it will just remind you you've got a few JPEGs missing. The student who produced this, he created some of his own materials with some JPEGs, and I haven't got those JPEGs. It doesn't make any difference really for what we're doing. So you see it is thinking. So this is my computer. Quite a detailed file list, so it's just packaging up the information to send it to Autodesk. But once that's finished, then I'm free to get on with my work. And then it's sent onto Autodesk's servers. So we just bear with that a moment. Okay, so yeah, it's just telling me that there are some images missing. So you can see QuickBooks cash register. I think what this student did was on that cash register, he put a JPEG as an image on it, and I haven't got it. Fine, okay. So now I can continue in the background. So it's gone off to Autodesk. I can get on with my work. So we've sent a visualization, and that will give us a sort of a render, give us a feel for what that space looks like for this particular time of the day that we've got set. But now let's actually look at the daylight. So we'll go back into our render in the cloud. We'll have the same view, but this time we want to go into the Illuminance. Okay? So we select Illuminance, again, image size. Normally you can put the image size full, up at 16 megapixels. I'll just do a small one for now. Now, it will, by default, it will pick the time of the day as per now. Okay? You can click use the date from the view, but I have found sometimes it doesn't pick up the correct date. And I was doing some renders last week at night, and I was quite disappointed with the results because they all came out black. Okay, so spent a lot of time to get a load of black JPEGs. So the easiest thing, I think, play about with that, but I just couldn't get it to work, is just to type in the time. So 10:46. Let's have 10 o'clock. And let's have June, 1st of June. Okay. Now, the next steps are really important. sky model. Now, most, probably about 95% of the class last year got this confused. Okay, so pay attention now. Okay, we are going to make a distinction between daylight factor and illuminance. Illuminance is quite simple. Luminance is just what's the light reflected off the surfaces at this moment in time. So if the sun comes in that window, you get a certain illuminance level. And this was all explained in the daylighting lecture that I mentioned earlier. Daylight factor is not doing that. Daylight factor is assuming an overcast sky, and it makes no difference what time of the day it is, and it makes no difference which way you're facing. So daylight factor, it's like the artificial sky, it's this overcast sky situation. Now, we can do both, but you just need to be clear about what you're doing. If you are doing illuminance, you need to sample that throughout the year, because it means nothing if you do a single render for the 1st of June and the sun happens to be out, and then you say, oh, it's lovely in that room, it's really bright, lots of light, great. You've sampled a particular sunny day in summer. So if you want to do illuminance, you need to sample it throughout the year. Now in the UK, we typically will use daylight factor instead, because it's simpler and it means you can simulate it once and get a good overall impression of the quantity of daylight. Now for your report, you may want to do both, but what I'd like you to do is to make sure you do the daylight factor at least. Alright? So, we go into our sky model and we need to choose a daylight factor sky. If we don't choose that, we can use these other skies, but they will be giving us an illuminance simulation, and the sun may be out, or even if you use the CIE overcast sky, that is not the same as a daylight factor sky. The CIE overcast sky, it's still brighter in the south than the north. So let's do a daylight factor simulation. So we select daylight factor. These settings become grayed out. Okay, leave that for now. So we're almost ready to go. Let's click on Legend. So the units are now grayed out because daylight factor does not have units. Daylight factor is a percentage. And by default, it will leave your color coding from 0% through to 100%. Normally, that is not the most useful scale, because inside a building, your daylight factor, it does not go much above 10%. So typically what I find is useful is just to change that from 0 to 10 and to try it. You can leave it on automatic. Oh, sorry, not in a daylight factor. In an illuminance, you can leave it on automatic. But for the daylight factor, I would suggest try 0 to 10%. If you're in a room which is much, much brighter, you might need to try 0 to 20%. Let's leave it on 0 to 10, and we're ready to go, so let's start rendering. And off it goes. Okay? So we have to just wait a moment. While that's doing that, I'll go to, let's refresh that. This is my Autodesk render gallery. And I'll show you how to get to this in a moment. And this is where all of your renderings will be put. And you can see it's busy. Okay? With busy rendering. So you have the name of your project file. And then within each project file, it will place all the renderings that you've produced from that project file. Okay? You can filter it. So you can filter under here, latest renderings, all renderings, versions. You can filter it by particular views. So many ways of seeing what you've got there. The ones which are busy rendering will have this this bar along the bottom to tell you that they are busy rendering. Okay. And let's just go back into Revit and see if it's ready yet. Not quite. It's still just packaging up. Okay, so we've got these missing materials. Okay, continue in background. So off it goes. Now this I think is where you see the real speed benefits, because you've now got 2 renderings going, but you can continue to work, you can go to bed, and do what you like. If you're rendering on your own machine, any of you who have done renderings in the past will know you need to think about sending it to render. Right, I'm going to make my tea. It's going to need 3 hours. Come back. Don't want to be doing too much else with my machine while it's rendering. If you're doing a really detailed one, that will need 20 hours to render, and it might crash. So, okay, this has gone. This has gone. Okay. Now, to qualify that, however, the quality of the renderings we'll get from Revit, they're not quite as good as a full sort of 3D Max, Cinema 4D render, using a lot of skill. They're not quite that quality, but they're pretty good quality. And I'll show you a few examples in the session afterwards about how you can then, of course, post-process to improve the quality. Right, let's just show you where to get to your render gallery. You have this button here, Render Gallery, and that will simply open your web browser at the correct page. You can access this page without having Revit open as well. You don't have to have Revit for this. So what we can see, we've now got. I just click on all renderings there. So those are the 2 that we've just sent, okay, and they're not finished yet. So it's busy rendering them.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I see the 4th picture? This is a render of Autodesk.
This one?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll come to that. I'll come to that.
This
yeah.
is the quality of rendering?
This is the quality. So, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. I'll show you that in full size soon. Okay. Right, I'm going to go back into Revit. Okay, and we're going to do an Illuminance render. Okay, bear with me. So we've done an interior visualization for a particular moment of the year. Now, what you could, of course, do is go back in to your sun settings and change that for a different time of the year and look at the effect of the sun. Okay. If you were interested, and it's not the subject of this course at all, you could put electric lights into your model and start visualizing the effect of nighttime. That's not this course at all, but you get some very good effects for your design projects if you start putting artificial lights in. But for now, we want to do an Illuminance render. So we go back to Render in the Cloud. Okay, we've got the correct view. Illuminance. Image size, let's just put it quite low for today. And what we want to do now is we want to, if I was doing Illuminance renders, I would probably be sampling it, say, 3 times throughout the year. So let's put this on the 22nd of September. And let's sample this. Let's try 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay. Sky model. We've got some different options. Overcast sky, intermediate sky, clear sky, uniform sky. I'm going to try the intermediate sky. And you can, if you want to get into that level of detail, you can change the intensity of the sun. So this is the design horizontal illuminance, the design normal illuminance. You can play about with that, but normally you wouldn't need to bother, to be honest. Okay, normally it will be set for your correct location. So we've said CIE intermediate sky, the legend. We don't want foot candles, we want lux. And for the moment, I'll set this on the legend on automatic because I've no idea what illuminance range we'll be getting at the moment. So I'm just going to leave that on automatic, and it will, when it color codes the image, it will automatically color code for the range of illuminance. That will cost us 2 credits, that's fine. So we send that. I'll go back into our render gallery. Okay, so the ones that we've sent to render are not quite finished, but I've already rendered them anyway. So the first one we rendered was this one. This interior view. Okay. And this is giving us a preview. So it doesn't give us the full quality of the image here, but it gives us a preview of it. To download the full image, click on the drop-down menu. Sorry, first of all, if we hover over the image, it does tell you what the resolution was. Okay. But if we just download image, that will now download that to my computer. Open it. So there's the image. I didn't render this at a particularly high resolution, but you know, even at that resolution, there's a reasonable level of detail. And you know, I think you'd agree, it gives you a good impression of what that space would feel like. You know, bearing in mind how little work we've done. Okay, we had to build the model. We had to put the chairs in it. We had to, you know, this student Anthony, he went and downloaded some very nice light fittings. But in terms of rendering, all we've done is click a few buttons and off it's gone and it's done it for us. And just zoom out again. You know, I think in terms of giving a client or in a university setting, giving an impression of what that space might be like, I think this is incredibly powerful. Now, if we compare that with the previous session, with the wind flow analysis, where, you know, to be quite honest, it's not the best tool, it's not the best software, it's not great, but, you know, I think this is really fantastic, actually, really powerful, really quick. You could, of course, now go back into Revit, change that sun, send it off again. Very, very quick. You could have lots of images in no time at all. Let's just go back into Revit because I think it's probably ready. Yeah. Okay. Back into our gallery. So, just bear that in mind. Oh, okay, bear that image in mind, and now we'll go and look at the daylight factor analysis, which I think is it this one? Yeah. So let me just Let me just download that one so it's slightly bigger. Okay. So, this is the daylight factor analysis of that space. And if you remember, this is the one I rendered last night, but it's exactly the same that I've just sent. Okay. If you remember, we set our scale from 0 to 10%. And what that does mean is anything above 10%, we won't be able to tell because it will still show yellow. Now, given that there's quite a lot of yellow in this image, you might go back in and set that from 0 to 20 and do it again. Okay, but what it is telling us, we've got daylight factor of at least 10% here. Then we move into the red. The red is about 7%. The back of that table is into the sort of 3%. And then when we go into this backspace, we're dropping into the blues in the sort of 0 to 1%. So, I think that's telling us that this front of this space is getting really good daylight factor. We're aiming for sort of, for really well daylit spaces, we're looking for about 5%. For normal kind of classrooms, offices, we'd be looking for 2 to 3%. So I think that gives you a good confidence that this space will have a good level of daylight. What it might also alert you to is you might start to think, is it too bright? Is it too bright in there? Okay. Now, you can then, of course, immediately compare that with the internal image. So, okay, and the thing to note here, because this is daylight factor, it's an overcast sky, so we're not getting these shadows. Because in the daylight factor, there is no direct sunshine. Right, let me just go back into our render gallery and open our Illuminance Render. I've done it in foot candles, that's a shame. That one, yeah, that's the one. Right, let me just download that. Okay, this is the Illuminance Render. So it's a particular moment in time when the sun is coming through at that angle, and this is now giving us the actual illuminance value from all those surfaces. If we compare it, daylight factor, no shadows, or at least no hard shadows. Illuminance, under a direct sun, very strong shadows, and the visualization using the same settings as the illuminance. So we go and have a look at the illuminance. What you can see is we're getting a huge range. So we've got 900 lux here in the blue, and we go all the way up to 60,000 lux on this surface. This red here is at about 30,000 lux. The floor down here is at about 30,000. So it's giving us some information about the actual illuminance. And where this can also be useful is it's giving you an indication where there might be issues of glare. So if it's simply too bright, so what we do have here, we have 900 lux here, and then here we have 60,000 lux. Now, because this is a sort of cafe environment, it's probably okay, because you can sit where you like. If your laptop's getting a bit too much sun, you can just move your position. But if this was an office environment, you might be a lot more concerned that we have a glare issue here. And I'm not going to get into the real sort of details of glare design, but as a kind of very basic rule of thumb, the eye does not cope very well with a sort of 1 to 20 illuminance ratio. So if, for example, if I take that window there, if that illuminance of the window was 20 times brighter than the illuminance of the column, and if I was sat here working all day, that will give me some discomfort in my eye, because my eye has to it's trying to constantly adjust from, say, 20,000 lux to 500 lux, and it doesn't cope very well with that. It's a bit, I mean, it's a bit too advanced. We're not going to get into glare design particularly, but you know, it just gives you that indication. What we will do in the second session next week, we're then going to start looking at some shading design, and what we might do with a space like this is start to add some shading, some blinds or some louvers, and start to rerun the analysis to see if that's giving us a better distribution of light. Okay? So, three different images. Visualization for a particular moment in time, illuminance simulation of a particular moment in time, and a daylight factor giving an overall view of the year, using that overcast sky, not using direct sun, giving us a good sort of overview of, is there enough daylight? Okay. Any questions on those three types of analysis that we've looked at before we move on? Okay. The reason I'm sort of labouring the point is because last year I obviously didn't explain it well enough, and most of the students didn't bother with a daylight factor. They just did the illuminance. But I'm very keen that you all use the daylight factor for the UK. Okay. If you're later on in the year, if you're designing in Delhi, or you know, a much sunnier environment, you would not be using daylight factor. But for the UK, we do. Right, few more features. What I propose to do, we'll go through till 12:30, quick break, and then we'll come back and then we'll finish by 1:30. All right, timings are all messed up today, but right. Back in Revit. Okay. Render in the cloud. The one we've not looked at yet is the interactive panorama. Okay, quality, final. Now, what the interactive panorama does, I'll show you. It gives you an image that you can sort of pan around. Okay, so it's rendering lots and lots of views, and you can pan around it. Now, these do exceed your 16 credit limit. So if you try and render these in 9 megapixels, you will go over your limit, and it won't let you do it. So for the free version, you have to do it in slightly lower. Okay. I won't bother sending that because I've already done it. Okay, let's just go back. So, this is an interactive panorama, okay, and what you can do is it will allow you to pan around, okay. So, it's actually 360 degrees, and it allows you. You know, I mean, it's not a walkthrough. You're not actually walking into the building. I'm afraid it won't do that. But it gives you that because it's rendered lots of views and it's putting it together, it gives you that feel that you're sort of, you're able to look left, you're able to look up, you're able to look down. Okay. And again, I think a lot of clients, if you let them have this, they think it was great. I think it was brilliant. The other nice thing about the Autodesk Render Gallery is you can share these projects. So you can put it into the Autodesk Gallery. So what you could do, for example, is you could share this on the gallery, speak to your client and say, I've done you an interactive render of your front facade. Can you go and have a look at it? They don't need Revit for that. They can just do it in this web portal. So, quite a nice sort of interactive tool. Or, all the design team could be looking at the renderings. But I think, these are quite useful, I think. You can do them for interiors. Sorry, I have got, yeah. So this is an interior version. And it just gives you that sort of feeling like you're in the space. You can drag and look about. Okay, so that's quite useful. Let's just go back up to the top. I'll download this one. Sorry, this one. Okay. So this one was rendered at slightly higher resolution, but it's still not even the full. Sorry, can you not talk, please? Thank you. So this was rendered, I think, at the 9 megapixels, and there's a decent level of detail there. I think one thing that's quite important when you are rendering is to understand that the eye is particularly tricked by small details. So, for example, you see this timber effect has a shadow and it has a bevel, which is just catching a highlight. And I think the eye is particularly fooled by these small details. Something you sort of I have learned over time with rendering is if you have some small elements of detail, the eye is particularly convinced by the rendering. If it has no detail, it looks a bit more like a sort of cardboard model. So if we just zoom in again on this, you see that because Anthony used this nice, he downloaded this nice table family which has detail, chairs, and we're getting the reflection off the glass. We've got some storage units. It's just kind of convincing. Okay. So that was just zooming in on a 9 megapixel view. Now what you can do, we haven't got time now, but you can play in Anthony's model. He's created all sorts of axonometrics, elevations, internal views. You can use these to practice rendering if you want. It's a nicely detailed model, so you get some quite good results out of it. Go and have a little play around with that. I won't do it now. He's got all these different views in there. Okay, back in our render gallery, another feature is once you've rendered this, you can you can re-render without opening Revit. So we have under here re-render using new settings. So you can go back in. The environment, Revit just has a few basic environments, riverbank, crossroads. So you can put a sort of environment in the background. That can work. If you're just getting glimpses of that background, it can work. If you're seeing too much of it, it looks kind of odd. You can change the quality, the exposure, the file type. All of those settings that we had before, I won't do it now. You can change all those settings and render it again without opening Revit. Okay. You can also re-render it as a panorama, solar study, Luminance. You can adjust the exposure. So there's the image. And if you want to, you can adjust the exposure here. I mean, obviously you could do all of this in Photoshop, but you can do it here as well. Play about with that. Okay, so you've got all those settings are available here. So there's really quite a good sort of powerful set of tools embedded in this gallery. Okay, what else? You can filter by what you want to show still images, show interactive panoramas, show illuminance. So you can filter those all on or off. Okay. You can filter here how you view it. You can delete, you can download, and you can share your projects on the Autodesk gallery. So let's just quickly go into the gallery and have a little look. So this is the gallery of thousands of other Autodesk users just uploading their renders. You can just share them, have a look. Sometimes people will give you a little bit of an explanation about what they're doing. He hasn't really said much. Conceptual start. But quite often people, the users they'll tell you how long it took, or any particular problems. Okay. I think it's quite interesting to look at the range of quality. So if we look at this one, for example, it's just not got the quality because this wall, for example, they're using a brick texture, but it's not got enough definition on it. It looks like wallpaper. It doesn't look like bricks, and the eye is not convinced. In this instance. But some of the interior views are okay. Here they do have electric lights on, so they're rendering using artificial lights. Okay. But I think the other thing to bear in mind with these renders is because of the speed, you don't have to think of these renders as sort of highly finished end of project outputs. In practice, we would typically be sending our renderings off to an external consultant to produce those renderings, and they would take a few weeks, and we'd have to pay them for it. And so we'd use those visualizations as a sort of end of project output. The benefit here is because it's quick, you can just be outputting renders throughout. and use them as a design tool. And then obviously the emphasis on this course is to be not just looking at the visualizations, but looking at the daylight simulations as we've explained this morning. Okay. So, what I'd encourage you to do is have a good look through these and, kind of interrogate these models. Find the ones that you think are very effective and think, why is that? What's so effective about that? For example, with this one, what I find effective is the sort of intricacy of detail. There's a huge amount of detail being added to this project. It's also using a very nice kind of soft render, so it's not got, the shadows are not too strong. I think that's quite a powerful image. And here, for example, I would say it's a sort of poor use of what they, it's probably unfinished, but here they're using one of the environments. So they're probably using a sea environment here. But because you can see it all, it doesn't look convincing at all. Possibly if that was more obscured by other buildings, it would be acceptable. Okay. This is what we're going to come to next week. Okay, looking at in a more kind of in terms of the metrics, looking at the building as a whole in terms of daylight and illumination. Okay. Any questions before we have a break? Okay, great.